Channel 4, presented locally by Xfinity.
Our next guest was one of the closest friends the late country music legend George Jones ever had. Earl Peanut Montgomery wrote or co-wrote most of the songs Jones recorded for more than 30 years, as did Charlene Montgomery, who was also Tammy Wynette's best friend. Charlene is joining us now to tell the stories that are in a new book, The Legend of George Jones. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
You know, it's hard to believe it's been 1 year tomorrow since we lost George Jones.
Unbelievable.
And he was a very special friend to you and your husband.
Couldn't have been any closer. The best friend that we ever had. And I feel that he felt the same about us. Well, I know he did. And he's got notes in the books, you know, telling how much he cared. But we just had a lot in common. We wrote a lot of songs together. We had the same interests. George was a common man. He was a legend. But the real George was a common man that liked to relate to common people. He's told me many times he never thought he'd be a star, never wanted to be a star, but he realized he was a legend, and realized he was blessed to become who he became, the king of country music.
And that's who he is.
But he was so good to people.
You know, you told me earlier that you and your husband spent every day with him for about 7 years when he was married to Tammy Wynette.
We did. We traveled with George and Tammy the entire length of their marriage, and Tammy and I became very close friends, and Peanut George was already close friends, and we did a lot of stuff together, hunting houses, and they were good at changing houses. They loved to move. Tammy did that to keep George occupied because he liked to decorate homes.
Oh.
And he was better than a woman was when it came to decorating a house.
So why did you decide to write this book?
It was out of a sympathy for George. I knew the better side of George, and most of the things that had been written in the tabloids and books were all negative, you know, talking about his drinking and cocaine addiction, and everything seemed to be negative that hit the news about George, but there was a really good side of George Jones. He had a heart of gold. Mm-hmm. He helped many people. And walk into a service station and go in the garage and pass everybody out there, be 90-degree weather, and he'd pass them out a $100 bill and say, hey, you boys have a cooler day now.
Would he really?
Yes, and he never introduced himself. They never recognized him because he would be in maybe a cut-off pair of shorts and a little jersey shirt and a pair of tennis shoes and living the common man life. Yeah. And he just have a sympathy for them, and he just want to make their day a little better.
Yeah. Now, you did say you hoped that he would be able to have read this book. You started this book, what, 5 years ago?
5 years ago, and my husband and I were traveling and singing. Peanut and I were singing a lot. We were doing like 296 dates a year, doing churches and singing at churches, and Peanut was preaching, and I didn't have the time that I needed to get on with it, but I was in hopes to get it wrote in time for George to read. I wanted George to read this book, but it didn't have to happen that way. I finished it 2 weeks before his death.
I think he would be very proud of you, though, and very grateful that you wrote it.
I do, too. I wanted him to know that somebody cared enough to tell the other side of him, and I loved him enough to do that. I really loved George, and not because he was a star, and that's what made our friendship so good, is because George knew that we didn't love him because he was George Jones, the legend. We loved the man George Jones was, and that was true with me and Peanut.
Real George Jones. Thanks for being here, Charlene, and
Thank
sharing
you.
your story. Again, you can pick up a copy of The Legend of George Jones, His Life and Death, at your local bookstore or online at heritagebuilders.com.